Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and to see so many new faces, except Chris's, of course. He's been stalking me for a while, so watch out. um, yeah, this is a really good timing to be talking about these things. One of the there, I don't want to be on your eyesight, so I'm gonna stay on this side. No, because he's behind you, and then just kidding. It's all good. So this work is really interesting because I went to agriculture school in Guatemala and graduated from a very conventional school. We were trained on, everything that every school trains on agriculture, combines and pioneer, hybrids and everything down the traditional line. But I had grown up in the rainforest, and we had a lot of traditional training in agriculture. And one of the reasons I wanted to go to ag school was because everything we were taught was so backwards and so obsolete and so, not real. But we had good training and we had good mentorship and from the older folks. And it was fascinating because I went into ag school, and within 6 months, I realized that was not agriculture. Nobody told me. It was just did not add up. I did the math. I did all kinds of things. I excel at chemistry, math, and irrigation systems, and all that formulaic stuff where you are supposed to calculate, how mass works within, systems from inputs to outputs and how it flows and all of that. And it just didn't add up. It didn't add up because there was a question. First, I asked the question that the professors were unwilling to answer. I said, if everything comes from the soil, which is what we were taught, and so you got to put all this stuff in the soil and all these inputs and all of that, so you get these outputs in this linear way. I knew it wasn't linear. Nature doesn't work that way. But okay, let's say we want to manipulate it and all of that. Can we do something better because we now streamline it into a factory-like process? And the bottom line was that none of the professors could answer the question of how did the rainforest happen. I grew up in there, and I was looking at everything through my training in the rainforest, traditional training and everything. But we had been taught about how the soil really isn't where plants come from. And this is very controversial. And it wasn't until like 5 years ago that I actually found the scientific answer to that question. But things still work. Whether scientists can answer or not, they still work. You know that. So, but here's the thing. I grew up in a space where we are almost standing on bedrock. In fact, the town I grew up in is called Poptun, which in the Mayan native language means over a rock bed. So we have about 10 centimeters of soil, and that's it. And if you dig in the ground, very quickly you hit bedrock, and building is really great because it's solid. But if you look at it from a scientific standpoint and you start using simple math, you realize that there isn't enough in there to grow this absolutely magnificent overstory. There is nothing in there really. When you think of the mass above the ground, it could not come from the soil. Simple. There was no confusion in my mind what things weren't. I just didn't know what was doing that. So they explained, well, the rainforest has these cycles of energy that is really efficient and all of that. But what energy? You still got to have the energy to cycle it. And so anyway, I had this theory. The plant didn't come out of the soil. It had to come out of the air. And then now we know from the scientific research that about 97+%, almost 100% of the biomass of trees and lettuce and tomatoes actually comes from the air, not the soil. So we got to start from there, because to understand what I'm going to talk to you about, you do have to flip your switches. You're going to walk out of here shaking your head if you don't flip the switches in your head. Because what we did was, with my team and everything, is we took that original questioning and that original approach at looking at nature, and we turned it into a large-scale engineering process that gave us the blueprint for what we do today. And believe me, it works way better than any linear-based process. So with that, let me introduce to our king of the hill, our chickens. They are the center of what we do. Now, but why chickens? Here's what happens. If you think of regenerative agriculture, you have to remember that you are no longer in the production of anything. If you are a regenerative farmer, you don't produce things. That's not what we do. We manage things. But what we manage is energy. So you're really a steward of energy when you are a regenerative farmer. So you got to turn that other switch on. Stop thinking as a producer. Start thinking as an energy manager. That's the only way this is going to make sense when we finish here. Now, if you're going to manage energy, and at the end of that process, or through that process, a multitude of cycles, you're going to harvest some of it. And that's what we call carrots and chickens and eggs and cows. And that's it's just a harvest of energy. So you got to think about how I'm going to harvest that energy without running an energy deficit. And that's the key to the energy stewardship in a regenerative process, at least the way we see it. I know this is not how it's being spoken out there. Regenerative agriculture just got slapped on everything lately. Nobody really thought too much about it. We did. So we're not falling into that trap. So if you are going to think that way, you have to then start with what ignites the energy cycle. And that is primarily the gut of the chicken or the animals. No ecology survives, no ecology actually moves forward without the animals in the middle of that cycle. And so if you're going to choose animals, you got to think, well, I could put a whole bunch of animals in my farm and go crazy. Because that's what you will do. You'll go crazy if you start putting ducks and chickens and goats and pigs and cows and all of that. You're not going to make money doing that. I can tell you that much right away. You may be a lot more efficient energy manager as a farmer, but it's going to drive you crazy because every animal is its own enterprise. Okay, so we thought, we're not going to think that way. We're not going to think of what we want or what the market wants. We're going to try to figure it out what would make the most difference from a systems change perspective. That was our original hypothesis. And what we knew was, if we're going to start with livestock and we want to make a difference, remember there is two things that we play with, knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is abundant. This place is probably loaded with it. A lot of people who walk around, just protecting this upper part of their bodies, because their heads is the main thing they possess. And so that knowledge, however, without wisdom is very dangerous. It's through, you don't find a farmer like my father who doesn't write or read producing glyphosate and creating the Gulf of Mexico's dead zone. Those are not the people doing that. The people producing everything that is going and destroying all of that ecology, all of them walk with sometimes multiple PhDs. Okay, I'm not saying this for PhDs in the room. It's not about you. Don't take any of this personal. The key is that knowledge without wisdom, we have turned it into a very dangerous weapon to destroy. And we're destroying the planet with knowledge. It's minute knowledge, of course, because we really don't understand most of what goes on. But we think we do, and we like to pretend that we do. And because of that, we become arrogant and we become imposing, and we tend to go and colonize everything. And that is, by definition, what it means is it is people, it is us who are actually causing most of the problem. It isn't the animals, it isn't the trees, it isn't the rivers, it's us. We are causing the problems that we have today in agriculture. And so what we figured was, if we're going to create a theory of change that actually has the impact we want, we have to start with people, right? from the market all the way back. The whole center of our regenerative design is people. Understanding nature was critical so that we can then engage in the natural cycles of energy in nature. But how you make change isn't by growing more chickens or by growing more cattle in the grasses, is not by planting more trees. Somebody else is going to come and cut them. Now, the way we actually make real change is by changing our minds. That's what makes a change. Because if we stop polluting, then that is a subtraction to the pollution process. If we stop polluting by somebody else doubles the pollution, we really didn't win anything, didn't gain anything. So what we figured out was we had to pick a livestock. Now we're closing that loop. Theory of change, knowledge, wisdom, all of that. Livestock in the center of the cycles. And so we had to pick a livestock that had the largest potential human ripple effect. And now you see why we picked the chicken. Because that is the only livestock that you can put in every single one of the 500 plus million farmers with under 25 hectares that, according to the UN, produce 70% of all the food we consume today. That is the actual statistic. The story goes that corporations are feeding the world and they have to keep doing what they're doing because they have to feed the world. Well, it isn't true. The data doesn't support that fact. It's just the communications and the propaganda supports that. But the fact is, most of the food we actually eat is still coming from farmers with under 25 hectares. And so if you're going to put animals in the center of a global redoing of a system, you got to start with that animal. If you're going to be regenerative, that one animal that you can put in every one of those farms, and also has so much market and market presence that it is capable of causing system level change. Okay, now having understood all of those things is critical before you go engineering anything, because we need to know where we are going before we start producing things. Farmers who just, especially young people coming out of college with no experience in farming, going out there, get back to the farm and start doing things. Within a very short period of time, they start realizing, whoa, wait a minute, that was a mistake. Start losing money, start getting tired, start really suffering from that rush. So we got to think this through. If you know where you're going, then you know which bus to take, which number, which route, and all of that, and even find the shortcuts. We have a saying in Guatemala that goes that if you don't know where you're going, every bus takes you there. Yeah? So for us was critical. All right, so now we established where we're going. We are attempting a system level change. That means we're not going to focus on a farm, but on a system of farms. And we're going to focus on those farms centered on poultry. Why? Because that's how we can have the largest social impact. And if we have the largest social impact, then we will change the most people doing things that don't create pollution, contamination, blah, 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 all of those other things. But it is with people. In fact, if corporations today decided that they wanted to fix the ecological crisis, they could do it tomorrow. There's nothing that they need right now except the will and the interest. Problem is that will and that interest comes from having wisdom. And wisdom and greed are not compatible. That's why we have a problem, not because we don't know how to fix it. Okay. Now let's finish our prayer and I'll get off my horse. This is our base team. We're out of Northfield, Minnesota. Wilbur is from the Zamorano School of Agriculture in Honduras. Neil is no longer with us. Julie is our COO. Lindsay and Paula are ecological consultants. Rocky is our farm warrior, he was nicknamed by YouTube. And Cliff is one of our first trainees, young trainees. Bob is our training program manager. And Craig and Linda are the new partners on a brand new 100-acre farm that we just bought where we are deploying our systems at a larger scale. This is the team in Minnesota. However, we also have teams in Guatemala, in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, in British Columbia, San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. We are we're building teams right now in Winnebago, Nebraska, with the natives, Fairfield, Iowa, Meade, and Lincoln, and Omaha in Nebraska. And I am here because I was told you guys were interested, or some of you were interested, on starting an exploration to take this system and deploy it in this region. Now we'll see if that's still true when we're done here, but I hope so. If not, no harm taken. I don't take it personally either. We got plenty of business, and we'll go where people want us. And so we got you guys in exploration, Ohio. I was just there, and we assembled a farmers team and a professional team, and we're going to start the process of training and developing and all of that. It takes about a year to get the teams all in place. And New Hampshire is with a bank there that has community development. Like, you know, a lot of banks have CDCs, community development corporations. They just thought this was a good thing. So that's our blueprint right now. We have exploration also in Belize and 15 other countries that have reached out, interested on bringing the system. Again, when you design something like this that is very simple and logical and it applies anywhere, it's bound to generate that kind of attention. We are marketable by design, not because we push it. We have never done, I mean, people come to us, let's put it that way. Right, Chris? As long as we can communicate this the right way. My wording is going to be jumbled a little bit because the coffee doesn't quite connect the neurons the way sleep does. But if you don't understand something, raise your hand. We got a lot of time. Okay, here's the foundation of our poultry center, and then agroforestry. We didn't even call it agriculture, if you notice. Now, the foundation of it is the fact that chickens are jungle animals. So when you start thinking the way I described at the beginning, you have to go to the beginning of things. Don't just take something for granted. For example, I heard about the pasture poultry folks, and I asked myself, okay, that's people talking, but what are the chickens saying? Do they want to be in pastures? So we went back and very quickly found out the modern chicken is the closest genetic relative to T-Rex. That was the first fact we found. And so, okay, we went back all of them, and I started reading what people say about that huge animal, and then started to look at I look at the skeleton of a chicken, and dang, I mean, that's when he hits you. It's pretty much the same. And then we started thinking, well, where did it come from then? Where when we first had our first contact with the chicken, what was it? Well, Southeast Asia. In the jungles of Southeast Asia. That's where the chicken, that's where the dinosaurs and all of that, that's where they evolved. It's what we call geo-evolutionary processes. That's where it happened. And it was in the jungle. You won't find chickens in the ground, sleeping in the ground, if they can climb on a tree. They will climb on a tree and sleep on a tree. That's just their nature. Also, you're not going to find them in open spaces. They are jungle animals. They don't like open spaces. They don't like the sun. If you have chickens, how many of you have chickens, by the way? Okay, wow. So we're going to have a good deal here, a good conversation. You won't find them in the sun. They don't like it. And we watched them for years. I did anyway. And if you look at them, how they tilt their heads to look up, they can't do that if it's sunny. And why would they want to do that? Well, their biggest predator is in the air during the day. At night, they are protected. Even if they are in the jungle in the tree, they're still more protected at night than during the day. So they're not going to venture into open spaces. They also, when they eat, we watch this for a long time, when they eat, they deliberately pick, and you tell me how they do this. Because the same way we couldn't answer the question of where the tree came from, we have been having a hard time figuring out where does the mathematical calculations of the chicken come from. Because they do forage They primarily want bugs. They don't care about vegetables, let's put it that way. They want protein and they want animal protein. That's what they will go for. They are not vegetarian animals. They are relatives of T-Rex. Now, they also like grubs, they like sprouts, they like tender shoots, they like all of those things. And I couldn't understand why. So we put all these kinds of forages in bands and then let them out and just watch where they will go. It takes them a little bit to figure out where to go. But once they do, it was very clear they were going for broadleaves, high protein, low fiber. Find me a grass that can do that. They trampled the grasses and ate the broadleaves, high protein, low fiber. But why? Because fiber takes a lot of energy to process. And the animal, if it's still smart, that's why we prohibited the Cornish broilers in our system. Because they are so stupid, they don't even know how to be a chicken anymore. So we can't grow broilers. I mean, the Cornish broilers won't grow this way. You can't implement our system with Cornish broilers. You have to do other things that people have come up with, and all kinds of ideas out there. But this won't work with them. Fundamentally, they are not chickens anymore. They are something else. But I don't call them chickens anyway. So that is where we went. We didn't go and say, okay, do people want free-range chicken, pasture chicken, cage-free chicken? That's all baloney. Consumers don't know what they want to begin with. Why focus on that as a foundation of what you're going to do on the farm? Focus on what nature has to give, because that's where the energy transformation is going to happen. And guess what? When you go to that as the origin, the departing point for what you do, it doesn't matter if you're doing cattle or other things, if you go to that as the departing point, you always deliver and exceed what consumers are demanding. Always. Always. I watched the California standard chickens go from 2 more inches per chicken in the cages. Before the industry was even done arguing and trying to rebuild those cages, the consumers had already changed their mind and they wanted them cage-free. And before they were done with that, the whole thing moved into a free-ranging. And before, even in Brazil, for example, the organic standard requires that the farmer has at least 1 square meter per hand of outdoor space, and they have to be outside as long as it's not raining. And I think they put that in there because they know it's always raining, so so they don't have to let them out. So anyway, just to give you an idea how fickle the market is, we can't trust the market. We can't use the market as a agriculture engineering principle or departing point. And so now, look at what consumers want: high density, free range, all of these things. Okay, we meet that. Anything that are coming up, we meet it. We meet it. We meet it. Not only that, but we are very efficient producers, meaning we are very efficient energy managers. And the efficiency of agriculture is not measured by bushels per acre. That's another switch you have to flip. You cannot measure efficiency in agriculture in bushels per acre. That is a measure of output of a given space. In regenerative agriculture, at least, we got to measure efficiency on the basis of energy flows. Energy in, energy out. If you measure conventional agriculture from the perspective of energy, it will collapse before you're even done with the first formula. Because energy-wise is the most inefficient way we have ever come up with to transform energy from non-edible into edible. All we do as farmers is take chemical elements in the soil, in the air. We steward the process of transformation of that energy through the soil and hoeing and tilling and spraying. However you do it, doesn't matter. The key is that all we do is manage that energy so that it becomes corn or something else we can harvest. If you don't use natural processes for that, you are automatically shutting down the very sophisticated billion-year-old processes that nature built for us to work with. So we shoot ourselves in the foot when we go messing with that. And so what is the way to shoot up in the air instead? Well, let's start by how nature designed these things and then bring it up into scale. so that we can still deliver the volumes and all of that, but no longer from the same departing point. No longer from our homocentric, narrow-minded way of thinking about how to manipulate nature, or by the narrow-thinking, insecure market who thinks he knows what he wants and then changes his mind the minute you start working on what it said he wants. So instead, let's go for the other side, right? That's what we established. So this understanding, chickens are a jungle fowl, gave us the code to open up the 99.99% of the possibilities that nobody out there was seeing, because they went the other way. And from that other angle, it's like an eclipse. You don't see. From this other side, you see the whole freaking moon. So now, if you're going to do that, how do you engineer? How do you take the agronomics? How do you take the inputs? How do you take the measurements? How do you apply a formula? Because we still have to do that. You know, all of this stuff is good, but you still got to bring it to the farmer. So here's how we process this. You take the energy. If you're talking about a production unit now, keep in mind that the production unit still has to be defined. Just like a company that produces these chairs or the tables still has to define what the chair looks like, what the table is going to look like, specs. You got all of these details somewhere in a CAD program, probably in a company, right? Because they got to produce that chair. Same thing with agriculture. What we did in conventional agriculture is we started using the acre as the production unit, and then or the hectare in South America and other countries, and then we measure everything. We spec'd out everything on the basis of the acre, inputs, spraying, pounds of NPK, whatever. It's all measured on the acre. And then on the other side, the output, bushels per acre, pounds per acre, whatever per acre. But it's all, the unit of production is the acre. Okay, we couldn't do that because the chicken doesn't know what an acre is. So we had to come up with a new definition or a new dimensional nature for the production unit. But then we realized, wait a minute, what about the ecology here in Ohio, kind of soil, all of those factors that we have to put in, because remember, we are regenerative engineers, not conventional linear thinkers. So the ecology really defines many of the characteristics of that production unit. So, but having defined that, having understood that it's going to change based on the ecologies, and coming up, then we came up with a formulaic approach to actually evaluate in a matrix so that we could evaluate the different ecological conditions of different places, including native species and all of that for the forest and all of that, so that we could then take the blueprint, the original blueprint, and then modify it and fit into any ecology. But we are not going to just cut it and paste it. Doesn't work like that either. So with that in mind, so that you don't take this literal, I mean, you take this literal in terms of management, but don't take it literal in terms of what plants will go into every place, because that has to be adopted. And even the breeds of chickens have to be adopted if we can. If a native breed, for example, is acceptable to the market, which is the case of most of Latin America, the native breeds are actually more acceptable to the market than the Cornish broiler. And so in those cases, we don't even want the Freedom Rangers or the Cornish broilers or any of that. We want to go straight to the original species, because they also happen that they do way better at this cycle that I'm going to describe here. So you take the production unit now, not the system again. The system is a much larger thing. It's multitude of farms with a multitude of production units. But and then as a system, the energy is always circulating. You don't need new energy from anywhere because it's already up in the air anyway. So we're just harvesting that energy and then putting it into the whole system. Now at a production unit level, we'll still do some of it, but we will bring some energy from another part of the system into this part so that we can flow it, right? So that's what I'm portraying here. This energy is coming into the production unit. That production unit has chickens that are free-ranging. They are free-ranging under this multiple-story jungle-like canopy. So a lot of reasons, a lot of benefits from that, which we'll go in later, including massive economic flipping that we can do in the production of chicken. But there's the chicken, and then you got the free energy. This is really what we're going after, because that is free energy that we get to take out of the air. Remember, 99+% of the energy that is going to go into those trees and the forages and all of that, all that energy is actually free for us to take out of the air. The more polluters pollute, the more free energy we regenerators have. Honestly, it's not a bad economic relationship here. And I hope they never figure it out and start patenting the air too, because then we're going to have to buy that. Or they're going to come and see if their pollutants are in our, in a new molecular structure, which may be now safe and all of that, and find it in our hazelnuts and then want to charge us a royalty for it, because they put it in the air in the first place. Think about that for a minute. So you take that in the paddock, we produce the first harvest. Now this harvest, we call it meat, eggs, hazelnuts, elderberries. It can be chestnuts, it can be walnuts, it can be all kinds of, especially nuts, because nuts are really nuts about nitrogen. And so nut species do really well with the poultry. Now other species will too, but we're trying to find one common denominator we could use. So oaks and so on. You get the picture. So that would be, the hazelnuts and the elderberries is the understory that we are building. And primarily we started with those two species. One, because they are native to 2/3 of the continental U.S. territory. So we can go anywhere in this state, in this country pretty much, all the way up to Canada and all of that, and not deviate from this. There's a town we are working with in British Columbia. The town is called Hazelton, because they harvest the hazelnuts wild, and they say that for thousands of years they have been harvesting them from the horses and all of that as they walk the paths to, just browse. So anyway, that and the elderberry plus the oak and some pines, you put those together and sugar maples, and they actually are symbiotically connected. They do build biomes. They feed each other. And so that's important, because that's how you transform energy more efficiently, is by using those natural processes. When you have a monoculture, you don't get any of that, because monocultures don't have that interaction that is critical for that energy transformation. So there is that. Now, we got a lot of energy that we can't eat, and a lot of energy that comes in the form of the fact that we protect the soil, and we keep a lot of the organic matter. We filter the water, but also we hold the water. We have not seen flooding in our paddocks, even with 10-inch rain falls, because there is massive capillarity system now that have been built. I dug up a 2x2 hole once to just document the cavities of the capillarity water tubular systems, and I went 60 inches before they start to get smaller. I mean, you could pour water there, and it will find a way into the soil. But more importantly, it will stay there because of the organic matter and all of that. We found blades of grass all the way 60 inches below, because that is more or less where the worms go in the winter. And so they need to build their cavity systems, and it becomes capillarity water retrieval systems as well. So you got now absorption, storage, and retrieval all in the same system. Now, which farm is not going to want that? The only ones I have seen tilling their lands are the ones who don't understand what agriculture is about. I mean, tiling. Tiling is the worst thing you can do to a farm from an energy standpoint. Because now you took the most important thing on a farm, which is water, and wasted it down the stream. So again, I mean, I'm frustrated because of the lack of science behind those practices. But also I understand. My neighbor is a good friend, and he farms over 1,800 acres, and he's doing that. And I visit with him, and he's shown to me that he can drink the water out of the tiles because it's perfectly clean. Never seen him do it, actually, but that's what he says. Anyway, organic matter, firewood, biochar, wood chips, all of this, the sprouting of grains now, because now we lower the temperature of the soil, increase the organic matter, massively scale up the water storage and retrieval. Now we have what I started calling, I don't know, maybe somebody already had another name for this and I just haven't looked it up. I'm calling it microprecipitation systems. It's the same cycle of the larger water cycle, except it's happening at the surface of the soil because there is organic matter. And the chicken actually is critical for sealing the tubular system so that it doesn't become a siphon, which is what creates desertification. So you see all of that combined, and now you got the perfect environment to grow a lot of the food that chickens want. Mostly sprouted grain, which they eat primarily within the first 3 days after sprouting. And we did the chemical analysis and the nutritional analysis, and it will blow your mind, the nutritional capacity of that sprout if it's sprouted under the canopy of a jungle like this. There is no coincidence to the fact that that's what chickens go for, and the fact that it happens that way. This was designed that way. We just got to be relearning all of this so we can do well. So because of that now, the understory of this canopy, which is built with free energy from the sky and all of that, in that understory, for one flock of birds, broilers, that we pushed the limits on last year. We're already doing sprouting and all of that, but we pushed the limits on that flock. We raised that flock with 33% ground up feed, 67% grains, sprouted grains. Now imagine this. The sprouted grain triples increases in biomass availability, mostly water, minerals, and all of that by about 7 times. You start with 1 pound, you end up with 7 pounds of sprouts. That's biomass that you don't have to buy now. Also, it's got so much water and minerals that now it remineralizes the chicken, increases incredible the health of the animal, the bone structure, all of that, its ability to survive, which means we got very little loss to diseases and all of that. And most importantly, it doesn't dehydrate the animal. One of the reasons there is the feed conversion rates are so poor overall is that we put into the animal dried up stuff, because we can't let it get wet, otherwise it gets moldy. But grain that is alive doesn't get moldy. It sprouts instead with water. Feed, it grows mold and grows vomit toxins and all kinds of other things you don't want in the animals. So you put that in there, and it dries up the gut of the animal because it's going to absorb all the water in there. Now, this is not as much of a problem for broilers because they don't lay eggs. But egg layers, one of the reasons they stop, decrease the production in the winter here is nothing to do with light or temperature. Everybody accuses the light and the temperature, and so they start putting lights and all of that. Well, we ran 2 winters, especially the winter when we had those 50 days at like 30 below. Remember when the Niagara Falls froze over? I think hell froze over that year too. That year, we were on the 2nd year of this egg layer flock. We did not put, we put heating, one of those infrared Amish heaters in the corner of the building just to keep the water from freezing inside. Did not put any artificial light. And we kept at 85% productivity efficiency. But we had other things that we were doing. Especially, we started feeding what we call grainsicles. These grainsicles are, buckets of trash containers with all of this sprouted grain, which was sprouted with enriched water, which means had a lot of minerals and calcium, just like if you put an energy, tablet from the co-op into your water, like that. So we put it into the water, and all of that got absorbed by the grain, and then we put it outside, and then we freeze it, and then after it's frozen, we bring it back and put it into the solariums, which are greenhouses that we put on the south side of the exposure of the building, so that it can warm up during the day, and the chickens can have sun and can scratch and do the things they will do in the summer. But since it's so cold outside, we protect them. So we bring this grain in, we flip them, we take the can out, and they peck at the grainsicles all day long. Sometimes it will last them up to 3 days. But what were we trying to accomplish? Well, number one, reduce the amount of feed and increase the amount of nutrition so that the chicken will be strong and continue to lay eggs even when it was dark and all of that and cold. Now, but the other most important thing, get water into the chicken through the food. Because if we don't do that in the winter, the humidity in the air drops tremendously, down to 30%, 40% sometimes. Just check the weather forecast, you'll see humidity. Well, what happens to you in the winter? Remember while your skin start cracking and all of that, because the differential pressure, technically our internal pressure and the outside pressure is so different. And when the differential ratio is that far, then one tends to balance the other. Nature will always seek balance, especially water. It doesn't matter if it's in its gas form. And so what happens is leaving our bodies a lot faster. And that's why we get cracks and all of that, besides some people don't put hoods on and stuff, right? But the chicken is having the same problem. And on top of it, we are feeding it ground up feed that is drying up its gut. And so the combination of all those two things is really what makes them shut down so they can fight for survival because they're getting dehydrated. You can go around without food for a while as long as you have water. Even Jesus went for 40 days like that, I heard. I see you're very religious probably because that straight face. Anyway, okay, I'll stay away from that, from calling out on the angels. So anyway, but you know that because with water we can go for a long time. Now, if you dehydrate, it won't matter how much food you get. You don't make it anyway. Try walking with us in the rainforest. You'll find out within 24 hours. It's pretty massive. So those are critical considerations when we think of building this environment for the chickens. And so the canopy, back to that, all of this roundabout that I went to, just to explain to you the massive benefit of returning the chicken back to its natural geo-evolutionary habitat. You can't have those benefits unless you put the system the way we designed it. You can't do that with chicken tractors, on pastures, on buildings. None of that works because you got to have that environmental capacity to transform energy. And that, nature is the only one that can do it that way. We can't. We can only steward it. So then we have excess energy. If we're, even when harvesting eggs, we're still going to have some eggs that are not edible. And at the end, you're still going to have giblets, manure, feathers, and all of that. And so that extra energy, we put it into a new system outside of paddocks where there is no chickens, but it's still based on capturing that free energy in the air through those biophysical chemical processes that is mostly based on the microorganisms in the soil. The healthy soil is critical, of course. Without all of that health in the soil, the transformation of energy doesn't happen. Dead soil doesn't transform energy. But it isn't that mostly what we need from the soil is water. Mostly. The rest of the elements are actually coming from outside. That's why in the research that scientists have done on this, they took trees planted in confined pots of soil, and they kept measuring. They kept measuring the molecular weights of the soil and the tree. And the soil molecular weight never changed. Yet that whole tree came out of it. But there was, the only way they could explain that was, well, the water, of course, that was putting in. But the rest of it was just the miracle of photosynthesis. And that's what we are banking on, is that energy bank that is endless, and it's always been there. And so with that in mind, we produced this alley cropping agroforestry system. That's why we stayed with agroforestry, because even as we go into a second, third, fourth, fifth, multiple harvests, we're still talking about systems where we are capturing that extra energy through the increase of root systems and canopy. That's really the kind of like, if you want to think of it, the straws that we are using to bring this energy, put it in the soil, stabilize it molecularly, produce slow release nutrients, composites like the leaves. Leaves are what, 90+% carbon, for example. Well, carbon is the foundation of all of the stuff that we are growing. We are carbon-based life, after all, aren't we? So all of that, just start adding up all of the science and the chemistry behind all of this, and what you have is then, with alley crop grain, you are not depleting the soil. You can keep doing this for a long time, because what we talk about is creating energy pumps. So the tree, you take two rows, and don't have to be rows. We're actually building bands of trees, and there's a lot of agronomics we could put into that. But basically, in the alleys in between, that's what we call it, alley cropping, agroforestry. In the alleys where we put the grain, we are making sure that underneath the ground, there is a large-scale root system that is capturing all the energy that the annuals won't capture. Remember, the annual has this very short root system. It doesn't matter how much poultry manure and how much leaves are coming into the soil, a lot of that energy is going to go right through. So if it goes right through, we lose it. And if we lose it, it's money going down the soil, and also pollution. So the way to recapture that is with the large-scale root systems of the trees. And you put that in there, not only helps the water and the filtration and the aeration of the soil. Remember, air in the soil is central to the carbon cycle, and the water, of course. That puts the energy back into the form of leaves. That gets dropped again in Brazil in the syntropy. I don't know if you heard of life in syntropy. That whole, those farms, that's why I was in Brazil recently to study that. That's the foundation of their system. But they also manage the trees so that they can bring that material back into the cycle so they can produce annuals without bringing in extra inputs. And it works. It works beautifully because at the end, when you bring some of those grains back into the system, you realize that we are only harvesting between 30 and 40% of the total energy that is accumulated every year. That means 60 to 70% of the energy we took out of the air and put it into these forms of energy, different molecular structures and so on. All of that, most of that energy, 60 to 70%, stays in the system every year, which means every year you are taking 100 units of energy, harvesting 30, and leaving the rest of them for the principal for the next energy cycle. That's like putting $70 into the bank out of every $100 that you get. That will grow your bank account really fast. Our foundation here, our energy bank, is exactly that. And we are putting 70 units back into the soil, roughly, because we don't have the science, but we have the scientists that have soared to this statement. So I can always call up on them if anybody wants to argue. But the bottom line is we know this because also if you start just going into your space and measure what you're harvesting, actually biomass. If you think of lettuce, for example, it's about 90, 92% water. So if you take what is left, I was really fascinated at this place we visited in Minnesota where it's a massive warehouse where they put this incredible aeroponic systems. And I took the container and we took the weight and we figured that the container was twice the weight of the actual dry biomass in the container. And it had taken massive amounts of energy to get it to that point. It was really fascinating to think of it from an efficiency perspective and wastefulness. So this is really what we're talking about. This is now engineered into specific things that we can then spec out. I can give you distance of trees. I can give you canopy density, all of that. We also observe the chickens with drones and with cameras under the canopy. So we could calculate the canopy density that kept them relaxed. Why? Because stress is the foundation of disease. And so we don't want the chickens stressed. A chicken in a pasture is going to get stressed really bad. And it's also not going to have enough nutrition. So all of those factors, now we can put them into each one of these, do budgets for them, do specific daily activities for them. I can train your workers. We can train 100 workers at the time to come and manage these systems. We can train 10 farmers at the time to deploy these systems on their farms. Now it becomes systemic and replicable and scalable. But it's got to go through this whole thing to get there. Remember, the industrial system didn't just produce an industrial system overnight. It took billions of dollars from our taxpayers' money, from our own pockets, to create a system that then keeps taking the money out of our pockets. Sorry, if you're a conventional farmer, I'm just saying. At the end, what you have is this, a regenerative, endless cycle of managing energy. That's what we were aiming for. While the perennials develop, we have been using corn. I use my native corn, sunflowers. You can use sorghum. You can use all kinds of other plants to create that canopy before the perennials actually become your perennial canopy and you don't need those annuals anymore. Underneath this, then we grow all of the forages and sprouts and all of that. And it takes very little water. When we have a drought, just a little bit of water stays there. We don't lose it right away. and also allows us to create those, that micro precipitation system so that the sprouts always come up, even if it's dry. This is a depiction of an artist. I was doing, we were setting up this operation in Guatemala, and there was an artist in the corner of the room, and she drew this triple bottom line. I'd never said triple bottom line. I hadn't said it until now. But I said it because she said it, and she drew it. Social, people feed themselves, reconnect, all of that, because you have to reconnect if you have a system. You don't have to reconnect if you have a farm. Think about it for a second. As a farmer, you don't have to connect with a lot of people. Maybe have to some, but you don't have the need for your success or for whatever you're doing to rebuild that social infrastructure. So it's got a pretty fascinating social impact. Ecologically, we clean the water. There is no way we have nutrients that are going down, and people have come and measured this and that and all of that, trying to find the problem. There is no problem. I mean, the only way we're going to have a problem is if we put too many animals into space. But otherwise, nature's going to take care of the cycles of energy. And the hazelnuts are not going to do well if there is too many animals. There is 100 indicators that we look at. The measurements, that's what academics need. What we look for is indicators. The indicator of health is pretty simple. When you go to the doctor, what do they do quickly, right? They take your temperature, heart rate. They go into your lungs, see if you've got any whoozing things in there. Check your stomach, because that's another important place for the microbiota and all of that, right? Those are indicators of health. And you can get very quickly, even by looking at somebody's eyes, whether they are healthy or not. Well, it's no different with nature. If it's healthy, it's healthy. It's pretty easy to see it if you know what to look for. And as long as you're looking from the right angle, you see the whole thing. You look from the other angle, you see the shadow. So anyway, we said measure away. Even with our fresh manure applications, I was growing spinach and lettuce and cantaloupes with fresh manure applications from chickens, okay? And they said, well, you must have a rubber stomach or something because you are contaminating. No, I'm not contaminating. Why? Because nature balances bacteriologically too. If you give it a chance, it will do that. It will clean itself. And so the university came and they did the test and they took the samples and all of that, all the way from the beginning of the spring, all the way through the summer. And they found the same exact amount of salmonella and other bacteria in the fresh manure applications than in the grass. It happens. Now, of course, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to kill yourself doing that kind of stuff. So don't do it at home kind of thing, But if you know what you're doing, this is not that complicated. Nature will balance bacteriologically, microsphere-wise, and also nutritionally. It will create its own cycles and water cycles and all of that. So that's what we concluded after we observed the first farm for about 10 years now. The computer is not working. Well, I guess it froze. Oh, there's something going on. Okay, I think there was something going on there. Yeah.
Well, let me see if I can find the machine.
It's moving here, it's just not moving over there. Yeah, it's funny. Ah, something was happening. Okay, so now let's go to the specs, because you came to learn the inside part of this as well. I always say, don't go for the production process until you understand why you're doing it and where you're headed with it. Otherwise, you won't see how this actually operates. So, first of all, we need the shelters. The chickens need to be in a shelter at night. There's no other way to have chickens and do it at scale. That one, the industry has it right, the industrial system. You got to bring them in. You just don't have to keep them in during the day. So what we did was we took the south side of our buildings and built them into a greenhouse like for the northern climate, and insulated the north side so that we can warm the chickens in there if we need to when they are little, and also when if we have early spring and late fall flocks, so that if it's too cold we can increase their, especially for broilers. The hens don't need much, but the broilers do, because if they are cold, they're going to shrink, and you want to fatten them. So that we can manage that. The temperature of the solarium actually stays really nice, even when it's 30 below but sunny outside. The solarium is very nice and warm. It's a very good place to be in the winter if you get the kind of winter blues that us Guatemalans get here. That's a really good place to be working with. We have 2 exits, as you see. I mean, not 2 exactly, but 2 sides where chickens exit the building. There's a standard for that. So you need a 1 meter, so 3.28 foot opening by no less than 18 inches high per 1,000 chickens. So we put 2 openings and 2 openings, and then we have paddock number 1 or number 2 and paddock number 1. And so while they go out here and forage under all of this and tear it up and eat everything, we have planted and managed this other side. So he comes up and produces that forage on the bottom. When they are done here, we rotate them back and we do the same thing over there and we repeat here. And then, so don't look at it as this many days here and this many days there. That's linear thinking. It doesn't work like that in nature. If it's raining and if it's cloudy, we will regenerate one way. If not, it will regenerate differently. It's about observation and about having criteria. The criteria is, for example, we don't let the grass grow beyond 3 inches, because at that point the grass is going to grow a lot more fiber, will spend all the protein that accumulated in the kernel, and now it's going to reduce the energy intake of the chicken instead of increasing it, right? So that's a standard. So if it's raining a lot, you will get that grass to grow within a couple of days. After it sprouts, with a couple of days, it will shoot right out. Especially 2-3 years into this, the amount of energy in that space is so much that it just explodes after a rainfall. So you want to be rotating a lot during those days, because you want to keep the chickens back and forth and do, in Alan Savory's words, I don't know if you know who Alan Savory is, but in his words, it's not the amount of animals that you put into a space, it's the time they stay there. That's a really wise observation. If you think of the bison, it was not a few bison. It was millions of them, hundreds of millions, in fact. And they went together. They wrecked the fields. They wrecked the plains in some people's eyes. No, they regenerated it by stumping it so massively. Why? Because they never stayed in the same place. It was the time they stayed there. And the same with grasslands in Africa and all over the world. And then there are ecosystems where you don't want to do that, where you actually want to have that perennial light presence. The rainforest is one of them. That whole system in the bison doesn't work in the rainforest. So it's about understanding those things. And so here what we're doing is understanding that this is kind of a rainforest of sorts. It's in between. Because we are putting it into the grasslands, yet we are using trees. We are creating a canopy, which means we are lowering the temperature of the soil. We are actually creating large-scale root systems underneath and biomes, which didn't happen the same way with the grass. So we are playing with the middle of that space. That's what we are creating here. And so the rotation is more the result of properly observing and learning and knowing where you are, all the way from the kind of soil you have, to the kind of trees that you have, the age of those trees, the years into the process. The first year, the system works one way. The second year, differently. Third, and so on. The 10-year, 11-year-old unit that I built way back when I started this work in Northfield, it performs totally different than the new units coming on board. So, for example, we changed the process for new farmers when they are taking on conventionally farmland that is technically biologically dead, what we do is the first year we put less chickens into that unit because there is no energy transformation capacity, so a lot of that manure is just going to flow right through, right? If it's a sandy soil, it's a different story. So we will change permanently the density of animals per unit on a sandy soil. And if it's a karst formation, like British Columbia where we are, or southeastern Minnesota, that's a whole different consideration. Northeastern Minnesota, for example, the water flows horizontal under the ground. It's made of these horizontal layers of rock. And so on the side of the road, you see this gush is coming out, straight out, like if there was a pipe there, because literally there is almost a pipe. And so those are critical considerations. That's why we say, if we're going to do this in a new ecological system that we have not yet tested it in, we have a process, very rigorous process by which we adopt it so that we can go for sure into this knowing that we are not going to have pollution, that we're going to have efficient production and all of that, and that you and your kids, your grandkids will be using the same unit and it will still be healthy 100 years from now, 200 years from now. That is regenerative.